Hi everyone, my name is Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia, and once again I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good as Gold. And today we have a very special guest, none other than the Chief Market Analyst at ITM Trading, way over there in Phoenix, Arizona. I refer, of course, to the incomparable Lynette Zang. Good morning, Lynette.
Morning, Lynette.
Well, thank you so much. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me in that great introduction.
Oh, absolute pleasure. It's we know that you're a remarkably busy lady, and just to have some time with you is very appreciated. Lynette, we live in unprecedented times. This is a comment that's been made very regularly. I'd say that we live in very unprecedented times, but the world doesn't. The world's experienced what we're going through now, including COVID-19. The world has experienced this many times, and history teaches us a lot. If we go back through history, then you could go back 5,000 years, and you could go back, and you'd note there that the Egyptian Empire ruled. You could go back 2,500 years, and it was the Roman Empire, of course. Not today. Today, right now, it's America's turn. However, if we went back 500 years ago, and we talk about this regularly, don't we, Brian?
We do.
You know, the Portuguese ruled the world.
Yep.
They had the biggest navy in the world. They dominated. And then it went.
Spanish.
Then it was the Spanish, and then it was the Dutch, and then it was the French, and then it was the British. And all of them held that position of power for approximately 100 years, and they all made the same mistake. They were always at war and debased their currency to pay for the wars, which is pretty much what America's been doing for the last 100 years. How did America get into that position? They provided goods and services to Great Britain, World War I, 1914 through 1918, and ended up being paid in gold, so they ended up in a very sound financial position. I think it was something like 19,000 tonnes, something
That's
like
what
that.
They had, yeah.
So, but then a gentleman by the name of President de Gaulle came along in 1965 and put his hand up and said, I do not trust the Americans. I do not trust their currency. I only trust gold. I want my gold. And so that he sent a warship to the United States and they did the exchange. But President Nixon, after that, there were a number of other countries that wanted the same result. They wanted to exchange their American dollars that they could at $35 per ounce for gold.
Why wouldn't they? Yeah.
Why not exchange it back for gold? Now, President Nixon knew that if he continued to provide those exchanges, he'd run out of gold because they'd simply overprinted. Now, I get to the point today, here we are today. America's really held that position of power since around 1920. Where are we today? 2020. So it's 100 years. And that seems to be the lifespan of these major dominant countries, certainly over the last 500-600 years. Today we're in the same position. Prior to COVID-19, the economy globally was in a very poor state.
Yeah.
COVID-19 has accentuated that. It's the trigger, it's the catalyst, and it's led us to where we are right now. But governments worldwide are now spending like they never have before, and they've spent plenty before. They've taken our dollar to currencies against, compared to gold or valued against gold, they're now 97, 98%. So now we're really starting to print currency with reckless abandon. I'm just looking at this, Lynette, and I'm saying to myself, are we going to see a changing of the guard? Are we going to see a baton change? Is it time for another country to take hold of the baton and take control? I'd really like your opinion on this. I think we're getting really close. Is it time for somebody else? If so, who might it be? And if so, when might that be?
What I can tell you is, number one, a lot of everything that you said is very accurate, but what you were also describing was the life cycle of a currency, where it starts out as a good currency with gold backing, which creates fiscal responsibility. And then as they remove the gold backing, that enables less fiscal responsibility. And in 71, that was when Nixon took us off the gold standard. I'd like to say this a little differently, because what you were explaining was that there was a run on the dollar. Because yes, President de Gaulle saw how we were debasing the dollar. And so it is the end of this currencies, of this experiment, because the big experiment was trying to control the rate and speed of inflation. But in my opinion, the baton is not going to be passed to a country. I think the baton is going to be passed to the International Monetary Fund, whose 196 members are treasury secretaries and central bank heads, so they're chiefs. So I think the baton is going to be passed further away from elected officials into bankers. And that is probably scarier than anything, because the IMF, with the most logical universal currency that was created in 1969 to take over as the world reserve currency, which is what you were referring to with the dollar, until we created the petrodollar. And then that's how we held on to it. And their currency, the SDR, special drawing rights, is a basket of currencies, and they can put every single currency in it that they want. And I think the reason why the doors have opened for that is because of the digital revolution. I mean, we're really inside of the fourth revolution. And if they can, and it's part of the globalization of the world, which I was a new stockbroker in the 80s, and I remember all of the talk about it. And so as a global economy, if everything and title to all physical assets are held digitally, wow, it's really easy just to transfer them around the world and then convert them, if need be, into any local currency.
Yeah.
So yes, I do think that there is not, actually, there's zero doubt in my mind. This is the end of this big fiat or government debt-based monetary experiment, and they have to reset the system. They're out of tools. They're done.
Well, it's uncanny, isn't it, that it's been 100 years. I mean, with all of the countries that I mentioned before, 95 to 105 years. So we're right in the middle of that with the US right now. So one would suggest it's not far away. How long do you think it's going to be before we actually see this change take place?
Honestly, the transition has already begun, and it actually began, it was 2009 when China raised their hand and said, how about the SDR? I mean, I knew they had to come up with something else, and I knew about the SDR. And frankly, that makes all the sense in the world, since everybody holds SDRs, and they've been used broadly for many, many years in the travel industry. I know in this country, in the US Post Office, you could go in the search bar and put them in. So this is not something that is going to happen in the future. That process has absolutely already begun. And you probably recall when Christine Lagarde was the head of the IMF, all of her discussion on the need for a reset. And so I think the virus, the COVID, is really justification for resetting the system. And you even have the World Economic Forum in 2021, the title is The Great Reset.
Yes.
So there's more and more entities coming out and discussing the reset, Now they're positioning as, oh, it's going to be more fair, it's going to be this, it's going to be, but if you have the same sociopaths guiding this new system as you've had in this system, I question whose benefit the new system is really going to be in.
Yeah. With the reset, Lynette, is that an overnight thing? Is that like one goes to bed one night, wakes up the next morning, and there's been a reset? Will we receive any notification in advance? Will it be clear that that's what's going to happen, or will it come as a shock to the world?
Well, there are different degrees, okay? Because in reality, the fiat money system is based upon inflation, and inflation constantly resets the value of the currency in every country. So their goal is to control it at about 2% a year so that it happens, but you don't notice it.
Yeah.
Now, at some point in here, and I don't think we have very much, actually, here's my opinion on that, and I'll just put my neck on the line. At the end of the 2021,
yes,
right? The whole LIBOR goes away, and we have to shift into a new system. And there have been a number of central bankers that have attempted to create a new interest rate benchmark and create a new market for it. And they have not been successful at that. And just recently in the US, with the Main Street lending program, so here they are lending many hundreds of billions and probably even trillions, because it's just a number anyway, it doesn't really matter. The Federal Reserve had the opportunity, in my opinion, to solidify the US's new benchmark, SOFR. And they didn't do it. All of those new loans are based upon LIBOR. So what does that tell you? Yeah. You know, that tells me a lot.
Yeah.
So, you know, there will be a big bang where it's overnight and they revalue the currency and they revalue gold, because that's how they do the reset. But it's been happening to us since 1913, and at times faster and at times slower. But the reality is, you know, that they try, as they do the reset, when you read their documents, they say a few very interesting, they say a lot of interesting things, but a few things that I'll key in on, okay? Number one, they want to keep the transition as close to what we are used to as possible, because then it happens, but nobody knows it happens.
Yeah.
And number two, they like distance between their policy and how it is delivered to the public. So they've been trying and working and discussing how to take us cashless for quite some time.
Yeah.
One of my favorite pieces is the Federal Reserve breaking below the lower zero bound, which they published in 2015. And, you know, and then further, how to take us deeper into negative rates. So they have to get us digital. Well, you know, look at what's happening right now. I don't know if this is happening in Australia, but because of COVID-19, oh yes, I mean, a lot more people, including me, I've been forced to adopt using online digital sources a lot more and paying for things where I used to pay for a lot more in cash, and intend to again in the future as much as I can.
Yes.
So it's pushed a lot of people in the directions, they call it nudging, okay? We've been nudged in the direction that they want us to go in. Now, all of a sudden, there's a coin shortage because the mint is not minting as many coins. And what, you have so many people out there shopping with coins? But the grocery stores here are saying, well, you know, if you don't have exact change, you can't use cash. So, and it's not just the grocery stores, it's a number of the retailers, which is exactly what they talked about in that breaking below the lower zero bound.
Yeah.
Dumb, you know? So I mean, my father always used to say to me, and I hate using this in some ways because it makes him sound like less than, but he was the greatest man I ever knew. And he would say to me, do what I say and not what I do. And I used to say to him, Daddy, that makes no sense to me. So I listen to what these guys say, but then I read and I look at what they actually do.
Yes.
And when their words do not align with what they're doing for themselves, yeah, it's a lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you can read them very well, can't you, when you actually dig below the surface. Lynette, obviously the economy around the world economy is in a bit of a turmoil. Yep. One point has come up, and they're talking about it right now, and that is, will China have a revival, right? Because they're talking about, well, we hear that the virus is not as dominant over there now. So will China have a revival? And if so,
like a second or a third wave you're talking
no,
about?
Economically,
yeah.
Will they have a revival? And will it be in gold or fiat?
First of all, I don't think we really know the truth about how badly or how well China is really doing, but I know that they've taken on a tremendous amount of debt, and a lot of that debt, especially in their corporate sector, is borrowed in terms of US dollars. So I think everybody's got each other by the cojones in some ways, if you know what I'm saying.
What was that again, Lynette?
I think the US and China have each other by the cojones. Okay. And China's really interesting in so many ways, because I really think what they're doing is they're showing the rest of the world how to control their population. I mean, they are a full surveillance economy. Can they have a financial revival? Well, I mean, it's just fiat. And when you know that you're going bankrupt, why not? But they cannot back their currency with gold. No country can, until they have hyperinflated away the value of their currency, their current currency, and repaid those debts and wipe that off. Because if they did that, that would lock that debt in place. And it's impossible to pay because you have constantly compounding interest.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I don't think it's possible. I don't see it as possible for any country.
Yeah, fiat.
Back the currency with gold.
Yeah, fiat first, and then when the whole thing drops into when it just goes downhill, that's when gold may come into the situation. This leads me into the next question. I was reading an article from Kitco, and I like what I heard at the first bit, and then I thought, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But I'll read what the gentleman said, the author said. So it's from Kitco. Early this month, the author stated that silver offers a golden opportunity, which we all know it certainly does. He went on to say that until a significant portion of these debts is repaid or defaulted on, it would be foolish to talk about the top in precious metals. Now, I totally agree on a part of that saying. Okay, my point, and always has been, that under any mathematical equation, I believe that any fiat currency debt can never be repaid, because every dollar printed has an interest rate attached. And because fiat currency comes from nothing, no amount of fiat currency can repay any amount of debt. What's your opinion?
Well, actually, I agree with a number of things that you were talking about, but the fiat currency, actually the currency itself, is a big problem for governments, because that is actually a debt instrument that has a zero coupon. So it's created from debt that has an interest payment, but even when you're going into negative rates, That's actually what prevents countries from going to negative rates when people can get their hands on the currency. So they need to eliminate your ability to hold wealth even in those pieces of paper. Now, as far as what the metals will do, first of all, there's two different kinds, because what you've got is you've got the traders, right? So you see Wall Street, and you see in almost every other country, spot gold, which is a contract, is making new highs. In the US, and it's concluded there's a cup formation, which is an accumulation pattern that indicates that smart money is when it's down at the bottom and nobody else wants it, they're quietly accumulating it. In this country, more than likely, we're coming to the end of that cup formation. So the traders can certainly drive spot gold a lot higher, because frankly, if it was being absolutely manipulated by the central bank, and it is being manipulated, there's no doubt about it, but traders aren't really interested in the fact that a rising gold price indicates a failing currency. They don't really care about that. They just want to make their money on a short-term trade, and they don't have that long-term vision. So it can go much higher from here. However, when we do get that big pop is when they are ready to fully take, there's barely any value in the fiat currencies right now, but people don't realize that. They marry the legal money of the state, and so that's why we work for it and use it as our tool of barter. However, having said that, I've been watching and doing studies on the erosion of confidence over time. And just before COVID hit, you might recall that on a global basis, a lot of central bankers were on this campaign going out there and saying, well, what do you want from us? What do you want us to do? Because they knew that confidence in their abilities was already waning. I mean, so that when the public loses confidence in these institutions, whether it's the government, it's a combination of the government and the central bankers, that's when they're going to have to reset the currency.
Yeah. I
think that there's really, I could be wrong because it's not within my control, but as a consumer-driven economy, and I think that's true globally, that if consumers are out of work, they're not able to spend as much. So I think by the end of this year, there will be some form of universal basic income. And once a one-off event, we're sending you $1,200, $2,400. Well, the people that were uncomfortable with their job position saved that money. They didn't go out and spend it. But if they knew they were going to get it every single month, well, then they'd start spending it. And that is when I think we will see hyperinflation become more apparent, because right now it's held in the markets. For sure it's held in the markets. But that's when I think we'll see the hyperinflation become more apparent. People will lose the rest of their confidence, and then it will happen overnight. So It'll be slow, and then it'll be fast.
Thank you. A lovely answer. I really appreciate that. During our seminars around Australia, I particularly talk about a gold standard coming back and how good a gold standard is. Some people disagree, but what I find is rather remarkable how the media never talks about the gold standard unless it's a negative, right? I'm just going to bring up a couple of points. A true gold standard, this is what I wrote down, a true gold standard has been proved again and again to be the only true money. Nothing else has succeeded. Fiat currencies have short-term gains, but long-term disasters. So what, in your opinion, do we have to do to get the mainstream media to listen? Now, I'm just going to make a point here about how the gold standard has, let's say, been the utmost currency, right? But you never hear about this from multimedia. So if we go back to, and your grandparents would know this, if we go back to around about 1908, Henry Ford produced the Model T Ford at around about $380 is what it cost when he got the vehicle up to about 100,000 units. So it came out to $380. It was very interesting though, if you converted your 380, that was equivalent to 18 ounces of gold. Now you move forward 110 years, and I'm not quite sure what a typical Ford would be worth in America, but over here Ford Motor Company were producing, up until 2 years ago when they left the country, but producing the typical Ford motor car that everybody could afford for about $40,000, but in real terms, in gold terms, wasn't 18 ounces of gold, it was 17 ounces of gold, and actually came down in price over 110 years. Now, this is when we believe that gold, well, right now, gold is set at X amount of dollars per ounce. If you go by Jim Rickards and it's $10,000 an ounce, that Model T Ford or the Ford Falcon or the Ford today would be worth somewhere between 3 and 4 ounces of gold. So why don't we hear this in the media? What's stopping them?
It's their wealth transfer mechanism. They're not going to give up transferring wealth their way. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that really is. It benefits, and I don't think they really know. I mean, I'll tell you a story. When I became a stockbroker, and there were 56 people in my initial class. Well, there was this one, and you had to go through a lot for them to even hire you. So you'd think, okay, these are going to be really smart people. Mm-hmm. And I made a comment one day, and I said something like, well, a bond is a debt instrument. I mean, something like simple like that, right? This guy goes, oh, that's really good. And he would actually write it on his hand or up his arm, these really simple things. So I don't think that anybody really has ill intent, but I do think that people are lazy. I do think that they do the minimum that they need to do to get where they're going to go. And if they're benefiting from it, why change it? Because inflation, like you were talking about, that causes nominal confusion. And nominal confusion is really simple. You had $20 10 years ago. You have $20 today. Nominally, it's exactly the same. But what that would buy you 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a year ago, 6 months ago, and what it buys you today is vastly different. So, you know, people don't understand that. The stock market's going up. Isn't that great? That's fabulous. Except that the value is of the currency that it's created in is going down. Yes. And the last time I checked, 1 trillion times 0 was still 0.
Yeah. Very valid point.
Lynette, I was watching an interview just recently, only a few days ago. In Victoria at the moment, which is one of the main states in Australia, they've had a number of cases of COVID-19, well over and above what they're anticipating. So Australia generally, and you probably picked up on this anyway, Australia generally has avoided COVID-19. We had lockdowns very early, got onto it very quickly. But we've now had this breakout, and it started to occur about a week ago. And so they're counting the numbers now, 70 new cases of COVID-19 on one day, 100 the next, 130 the next. So they've now locked down the state of Victoria again. Regional Victoria cannot drive into the city. For example, it's a complete lockdown. Now, I watched on television the other day an interview that took place, and the interviewer said to the doctor, "Whoa, here it comes. This is the second wave." He said, No. This is the first wave. He said, "We didn't get the first wave because we did such a good job of the lockdown. So he said, this is it. This is the first wave, and there will be a second wave, and there will be a third wave." And it became a very, very negative conversation. Now, my question is this. There is a question that, and look, we all have varying views on COVID-19. There are some qualified doctors out there that say that, hey, it's a farce. And there are others that say it's the real thing. And there are others that are somewhere in between. But this is a question that is never asked. And I'd like your impressions on this as well. But here's the question I would ask. The doctor says this gentleman is equivalent to, say, an Anthony Fauci in the United States. He said there's 130 new cases. This is disaster. I would ask the question, okay, if that was the case on Tuesday in Victoria, can I ask you, doctor, how many cases there were of the common flu on the same day? Now, he can only answer it one of three ways. If he says, well, the same, we had about 130 new cases of the flu, then I would suggest that that's incredibly dangerous, because we know that the mortality rate from the flu is generally recognised as being much higher than COVID-19. In which case, if there is as many new cases of the flu, why are we not bringing that to anyone's attention? Secondly, the answer could be, we've had many more cases of the flu on the same day. We've had 500 cases, in which case we have a very, very serious problem, because that even enhances the chances of the mortality rate going up. And if it goes the other way and the doctor said, well, hey, there weren't any cases, there are only 10 cases of the flu, I'd have to ask the question, well, how is that possible? Because on this day last year, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, and the year before, we had 1,000 cases of the flu. So why is it that today we have none? In which case, is there a possibility that a number of people, or a majority of the people who are getting the flu, are being diagnosed and reported as having COVID-19? I do not know why this question is not being asked, because I think Australians, I think Americans, I think people all around the world need to know the answer to this, because then I think this will break the shackles a little bit and determine how dangerous this COVID-19 may or may not be. What's your take on that? I just see it as a question that's constantly being overlooked, ignored. No one's asking it. I think we need to know.
I am definitely probably about the least medical person that you're going to interview. But what I can say is, I did do a study going into the lab in Wuhan, and they knew that this was going to happen because they were experimenting in creating these superbugs. So I personally find it very interesting that they were doing all of these studies and creating these superbugs, but at the same time, they weren't looking at an antidote or something that might help it. So for me personally, and knowing what I know very well that the world would not have accepted another bailout like there was in 2008. But now there is a pandemic, or a plandemic, as some people want to call it. And so they're pointing the finger over there and say, oh, no, we didn't do it. I mean, it's all because of the COVID-19 virus.
Yes.
So I think that's part of what makes it really challenging. I think they're using it as a cover to do the reset, because this is a great excuse. They're going to shut down the global economy. It was broken anyway. It's not like this wasn't going to happen.
No.
You've got 2021 coming up, and we're already halfway through 2020, and their plans to transition weren't manifesting, wasn't happening. And you had corporate earnings that were already declining. We were going into a global slowdown. So, for me, I have to tell you, my niece actually contracted it. And she recently sent, because she's feeling better, thank goodness. And she recently documented how she felt on day 1, day 2, etc. And it was kind of scary what I read. But I'm not a medical professional. I can't answer to that, but I can answer to the documents that I've read from the lab, from the International Monetary Fund, from the Bank of International Settlements, from the Federal Reserve, and I can draw my own conclusions to that. But I think this is a great excuse, and everybody's going to go, well, yeah, we need a reset because this isn't working and all the pandemic and all of that.
Yeah, like it's I appreciate the comments. I'm just staggered and bewildered by the fact that there constantly seems to be no reference to the flu. Prior to COVID-19, we heard about it. Flu injections, everyone talked about the flu and the death rate. Now we hear nothing at all. And I'd like to know what the comparison is. You know
what else is really interesting to me personally? Because they've been degrading our food supply for so many years. You talk about Ford, well, McDonald's, did with the food industry what Ford did to the car industry. And the quality of what people eat, does not help you support your immune system. And so, they never talk about that. Change how you eat. Stop eating that McDonald's.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Start eating food that actually supports your immune system.
Yeah.
I don't get a flu vaccine. Never. I wouldn't even consider it.
No, we're of the same.
Right. I grow most of my own food. I know the water, I know the soil, I pick it and I eat it. And my immune system, I feel like my immune system is really, really powerful. And that's what it needs to be, whether it's cancer or COVID or the flu or anything.
Yeah.
So I wish they'd talk about that more.
So do I. Yeah, the obvious things are being overlooked, yes.
So needless to say, there's not too many McDonald's burgers and KFC in your diet.
Oh, there's zero. I couldn't even tell you when the last time I even considered anything. No, ew.
I've relented probably once or twice, but only once a year because I have two younger children, and because they grow up with this stuff. And I relent, and the last time I had KFC, I said no, not for at least another 12 months, guys. 12 months, only once a year. Anyway, we'll move on. Very quick one. Lynette, do you believe the COMEX and the LBMA have a future in the pricing of gold and silver?
Again, it's the foxes in the hen house. It depends on, if, because they can always declare a force majeure if enough people or enough entities want delivery of the gold. I mean, they certainly are selling a whole lot more contracts than the gold that they have for delivery. Are they going to? I hope a whole new system comes in that's more honest and more transparent, because I think the current system is not either one of those.
No. The current system, you can see, well, it's 100 years and everything is failing. So it is an obvious thing that I believe has to be changed. Before Darryl finishes off, I have one more question. How far away are we to finding another Ron Paul, a 2012 candidate for the President of the United States? How long do you... This guy was brilliant. I think his son is really nice, ran, but Ron Paul just seemed to have it all together. So how long is it going to take before we find another one of those?
Too long.
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Although what I'll say is the system has to reset. So I would probably rather have that person in there on the other side of, not quite the full other side of this, but after the big crash, So, because nobody's going to be able to stop this. And I don't even think there's any good way to guide through, because the whole world is bankrupt. Except for people that hold physical gold and silver.
Gold and silver, yes. That they'll have the power at that stage, or at least have the insurance to go through the mess that we're about to go through. Yeah.
Exactly. And have wealth transfer their way. I mean, that's the opportunity. We talk about all of this really negative stuff, but, you know, history also shows us that when a country goes through hyperinflation, the currently overvalued assets, real income producing assets, drop in terms of fiat pretty dramatically. Well, if you've held your purchasing power, then you have the ability to go in and buy that. And, you know, when I first became a stockbroker, nobody ever talked about outliving their savings, because you could generate 10% from a government bond. So, you know, you could live quite well on that. But over the years, because of the degradation of the whole system, you know, now it's like, well, okay, you only have enough money till you're 87. Well, if people position themselves properly with physical gold now, because for me, that's wealth preservation.
Yes. Yeah.
Then when those income, high quality, I'm not talking about bonds, certainly, because that's not high quality anyway, that's debt. But when the high quality gets undervalued, is cheap, now you can capture some of those gains, go into that, buy that really cheap, and you can generate income for the rest of your life and leave a legacy for your children, because we need to do that. If those that are in power now remain in power, our children will have nothing. It'll just be a small group.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a very good friend and mentor that I speak about regularly, Peter Daniels. But Peter's now in his mid-80s. But, you know, he always used to say, it doesn't really matter what happens in the world tonight, because I'll still be able to party tomorrow because I have physical gold. And he's educated his sons and his daughter, who have educated their children to do exactly the same thing. And that's what we really need to do. We've just got to educate from mum and dad down.
That's what we do.
Yeah,
that's what we do.
And our family is the same. My son finds he's a very astute young man and has been well educated, has connected with Peter as well, Peter Daniels, and has learned from Peter over his 85 years and condensed it all into 30 years and is the beneficiary of all of that. So it's all about education. We need to keep providing that. Which leads me to my last question. In fact, I was watching with interest the other day a high-profile television breakfast announcer, and I heard that this person had just recently, and I read it directly afterwards, that this person had just decided to sell their Bondi Beach, North Sydney property that they had purchased in 2014 for 2.15 million, and it was now up for sale for 2.8 million. Now that sounds pretty good. I mean, just looking at it, 2.15, 6 years later, 2.8 million. Mainstream media tend to promote real estate in this manner, but what they tend to overlook, of course, are the actual costs that were incurred by this person in holding that property for 6 years. And I just wanted to quickly go through those. Annual cost, including, they never talk about stamp duty, but the stamp duty component was just over 60,000. So I was a little lenient and a bit conservative, and I said $50,000. Council rates are $8,000 a year, was another 50,000 over that period of time. The repayments were $9,200 a month. So it's cost that person $662,000 in repayments, including interest. To sell the property, another $28,000. And renovations, so most people would do a little bit of renovation work, even if it was a wonderful property. It's not quite what they want, so that renovations and maintenance, another $60,000, a total of $850,000 to live in that property for that 6-year period. So in reality, if she was lucky enough to sell the property for the 2.8 that it's advertised for, she would be down $200,000 in real terms. So alternatively, I sat down and did some sums, Lynette, and I thought, okay, let's say she had taken, because I allowed for a $400,000 deposit, 20% deposit on that property. So let's say this lady had now decided not to purchase the property, and she put the $400,000 as $400,000 as she invested it in gold. Now, in gold in 2014 was $1,380 spot, and I'm pretty sure you know where I'm leading to. But gold in 2020 now, this is Aussie dollars, 2,600 spot. So the sale on the gold, if she'd sold the gold, she would have made approximately 90% on her investment, $360,000 profit. But as well as that, she would have not had stamp duty costs. Let's say she rents instead of buying. So she would not have had the stamp duty cost. She would not have had the council rates to pay. She would not have had to sell the property and incurred those costs, and she wouldn't have had any renovation or maintenance to worry about. So she would have had another $188,000 available to her over that 6-year period, which she would have made a profit on if she'd invested it in gold of $100,000, which means she'd have $360,000 plus $100,000, which is $460,000 in profit. She'd have that in her hand in preference to being down $200,000 in purchasing that property. Now, so what I'm trying to emphasize here is how much mainstream media exaggerate and the manner in which they promote anything that they want to. Gold flies under the radar all the time, doesn't it?
It's so secure.
In fact, it is such a wonderful investment. The last 20 years, gold's return has been, in Aussie dollars, around 12%, year on year on year, compounding in taking into consideration the whole compounding process. Phenomenal return on investment, better than any other market in this country. Keeping all of that in mind, Lynette, what I'd like you to do, if you could, is just share with us where you believe gold and silver are heading, and it's a question you would have been asked many times, of course, but where do you believe gold and silver heading, say, this year? So we've got 6 months to go, and then I say over the next 5 years.
Well, you're going to have to translate it from US dollars to Aussie dollars.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's, the way I kind of think of it. But we just a week ago last Tuesday, spot gold, because I really think of spot gold as a contract. And I know that's what you're referring to. So I'm going to answer this in 2 ways.
Yep.
Okay. The contract spot gold broke a key resistance level.
Yes.
So on the very short term, I think we will get to that 1900, and it's highly possible and probable, because we're not that far from it right now, that we could see us test that 1900 level that was created in 2011.
Yep.
Let's see, where are we now? I would say within, maybe, you can't hold me to this because I have control over it, but over the next month, probably, I would say that we would be testing that. And once it goes past that level, especially if we do UBI before the end of this year, it would not surprise me to see spots somewhere by the end of this year, maybe 2,500 US dollars. But what I personally feel this is where my real confidence is, because again, when you're thinking in terms of dollars and you're thinking in terms of profit, when it gets to where it's ultimately going to go, unless you need those dollars to pay something off, you're not going to want to convert your gold into that anyway.
No, that's very true.
I really like to talk about the true value, what I call the fundamental value of gold for its most important function, which is to hold its value over time. So if they were, and I did this calculation a few months ago, which means it's higher now, but if they were to reset the currency, because that's really a big function of gold, is to have something that has no intrinsic value. So whether it's the Aussie dollar or the US dollar or any other currency, fiat currency, to revalue it against gold. If they had done it a few months ago, it would have been in US dollars, 11,500, and it's higher than that now. So even when spot goes to 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, it is still severely undervalued. It's the biggest bargain on the planet, bar none. That's why you see global central banks gobbling it up as fast. They're taking more than 20% of the production. Plus, they're not selling what they have. And they're the smartest guys in the room on money. They create it, they manipulate it, they devalue it. So, even if you don't know anything else, but you look at what the smartest guys in the room on any given topic are doing for themselves, and you do it for yourself, you're probably going to be best off.
I think Jim Sinclair puts it pretty correctly when he says, just do what the central banks of the world do. Central banks own gold. Why wouldn't you want to do the same? Now, I may not be a great fan of the central banking system, but that makes really good sense. And I guess Egon von Greyer's Egon at the moment would say, upon being asked the question, how much should I invest in gold or silver? Egon would say, as much as you can't afford to lose. So if you've got $1 million and you can't afford to lose 1 cent of that million, you better put the whole lot in. So if you've got $100, same thing. Yeah, and I say he's right on the money there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially in these precarious times. I mean, every time a central banker tells you, we need more inflation. We haven't hit that inflation target. What they're really telling you is that the currency is overvalued and they're taking it down.
Yeah.
And that's good for gold because gold's the opposite.
Correct.
Lynette, I would say on the inflation terminology, I really find it mind-boggling because, yes, you hear this inflation, we haven't seen inflation, and yet, yes, maybe at the supermarket we haven't quite got there yet. But when you have a look at the stock market, the real estate market, that's where it's all going. That's where it's all gone. That's inflated like you wouldn't believe. We have seen inflation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, they talked about the reflation trade. That was all the talk after 2008, the reflation trade. Hello, but there is in this big balloon that they've created, there are a lot of pinpricks all over it. So that's why you see them having to pump more and more. And, something really interesting, and Wolf Richter has been writing about this, and I think he's very brilliant as well. And Egon, of course, I love him. But Wolf Richter says, and when you look at the data, he's right, that what they did was they front-loaded QE so it didn't last over years. And now they're attempting to pull that back a little bit. I don't think they're going to be able to do it because the markets have them, again, by the cojones. So sorry.
What was that again? Just a question. Well, it's not a question. It's a comment. When we spoke with a number of our clients about this interview today with Lynette, we got some really interesting feedback, and I thought I'd share it with you. and that was, and I was quite surprised by, although
You
maybe
still
I
had me on after the feedback?
the consistent comments were that you had been totally responsible for these people getting involved in the precious metal space. And I've never heard the comment as regularly as I did about Lynette. We're really looking forward to this because and the reason, Lynette, was that they said, I asked the question, and they said, because Lynette makes so much sense, she is right on the ball, and she explains the whole process in a manner that is so easy to interpret. Yeah. So I just thought I would give you that feedback because it was consistent with our client base.
Well, I have to tell you that I have been groomed for this moment in time, and that is my mission, to translate financial noise into understandable language, because they intentionally make it so complicated. They say it, if we make it really complicated, nobody questions us. Well, and it's very complicated. It's so complicated, they don't even understand what they've created. So I'm very honored, and I really appreciate that feedback. Thank you so much. That really means a lot to me.
Well, and I can understand that. No, well done, Lynette. You've obviously done a fantastic job.
You have a great audience
so well
here in
received.
Australia.
Yeah. So before we close, would you like to provide some closing comments? Anything that you would just like to say? I mean, I'm certainly I need to ask you a question now anyway, and that is that I know that you provide some wonderful information via ITM Trading. And we've got a lot of people, we've just mentioned that, in Australia that look to you for information. If they want to know more about what you offer at ITM Trading, where do they go? What do they do from here? How can they access you?
Of course, I have the YouTube channel, and so I'm on there regularly. And of course, there's also the website. It's a little challenging doing business overseas because of the shipping costs and also how it gets stuck in transit. But we're really open to helping anybody that we can. And, when I'm looking at what I would really suggest to everybody is, we've had, at least in this country, I don't think you had it quite there yet, but you're probably going through it now. Look at where your holes are, because it isn't just gold and silver. You've got to have them physical in your possession so that they're a universal tool of barter. But you also need to make sure that you are as independent and as self-sufficient as you can possibly be. Food, water, energy, security, community, shelter, barterability, and wealth preservation. And gold and silver hit the barterability and wealth preservation piece. So I can tell you from experience, because here in Arizona, we are on our second wave. And I started my urban farm with the water, and that's been my mantra for many years. And I'd look at it regularly, and I'd go, okay, where are my holes? What can I do to plug those holes? And that would be my highest recommendation for everybody, is to take a look at those holes in those areas, food, water, energy, etc., and to do this as quickly as you can, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And you can find a lot of this information on our website, itmtrading.com.
Yeah.
And can I give them a little sneak? Okay. I'm not exactly sure of exactly the day, but we're very close, where the rest of the mantra, the food, water, energy, security, and community and shelter, there will be a new website, LynetteZang.com.
Wow.
So And it's going to address, ITM addresses the gold and the silver, and we really do a plan. And it's based upon the repeatable patterns that we've talked about today of currency life cycles. So, you know, I just recognize the patterns, and that's what we do at ITM. It's really what makes us different. But you need the whole package. You need the whole mantra.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say to people. You really just look at where your holes are and get them filled as quickly as you can.
Yeah, we have a lot of subscribers in the United States of America, of course. So we would recommend that you make contact with ITM and Lynette Zang. Lynette, what we believe is one of the smartest ladies in the world in this space at the moment. Don't look so surprised.
So I think I have really broad shoulders.
Maybe it's a Mrs. Ron Paul coming through.
Lynette, look, thank you so much for today. We really appreciate your time. Just putting it aside to spend an hour with us, it may have been. And so really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you. And look, we'd love to think that we could do this again. We would really
love to. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we will look forward to that. And to our subscribers, our clients who support us so strongly over here, we thank you so very, very much. And so we would say until next time, stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.